Aloha! I'm Dr. John Westerdahl. I'm the Director of Wellness and Lifestyle Medicine at Castle Medical Center, which is located here on Oahu. Castle Medical Center is part of the Seventh-day Adventist Hospital System and is a leader here in Hawaii in the field of wellness, lifestyle medicine, and vegetarian nutrition. I also host a weekly talk program called Nutrition in You that airs here in Honolulu and is broadcast throughout the Hawaiian Islands. I'm a host on a television program locally called Tasty and Meatless that promotes vegetarian nutrition. Also, I am the nutrition editor for Veggie Life magazine, a national magazine on vegetarian cooking and lifestyle. Here in Hawaii, I represent the Vegetarian Nutrition Practice Group as the state coordinator. First part of the program, I will be talking on traditional Hawaiian diets. The early Polynesians, when they came to the Hawaii Islands many years ago, they brought with them many of the foods that we have here on our islands today that didn't originate on our islands. They brought them over here. And since then, Hawaii has really become a paradise of wonderful, healthy foods. In ancient Hawaii, the diet primarily was a starch-based diet. We find this pretty much with a lot of ancient traditional cultures. Starch is the basis of the diet. The staples were taro, tuber, and poi, which is fermented taro starch. Along with, they had sweet potatoes, yams, breadfruit. The Hawaiians did not eat grains, which is a starch, of course, in other cultures. They ate lots of fruits, particularly things like mountain apples and bananas, and some of the fruits that you see here, of course, came later on to Hawaii. And the ancient Hawaiians ate large amounts of greens and other vegetables were consumed, including seaweed, sea vegetation that they gathered from the ocean. Coconuts and kukui nut, which was used more as a condiment in their food, also provided some of the additional fat to the diet. And in smaller amounts, they did have some fish and seafoods. The Hawaiians that lived away from the sea and that were closer or more inland actually had more of a vegetarian type of diet. Chicken was eaten only occasionally by the common people. Actually, chicken was considered a sign of wealth. So it was just once in a while and occasional purposes that the common people did have chicken. And a lot of people think of luau's and the pig and pork, but actually the legendary centerpiece of the luau, the pig, was not really eaten by the common people, and it was forbidden food for women. It was really reserved for the ali'i, or the royalty of Hawaii, at special feast days. Dairy products were not included in the traditional Hawaiian diet, so they got much of their calcium from the green leafy vegetables that they ate in their diet. Also, it doesn't appear that they had osteoporosis problems, and that probably is a result, in addition to eating the green leafy vegetables that had rich calcium, and also, by the way, the seaweed has calcium, that by being on a low animal protein diet, that this may have been helpful in making their utilization of calcium better. The traditional Hawaiian diet was very low in fat, very low in animal products, high in complex carbohydrates, high in fiber, and high in vegetables. This gives you an idea of the ancient native Hawaiian diet compared to the modern Hawaiian diet. And you see at the top that most of their protein actually came from plant sources, about 11% out of the 14% that you see there, 14 to 15%, where in modern times only 3% of their diet is coming from vegetable protein. So you see a reversal of the protein distribution. 73% of the ancient Hawaiian diet came from complex carbohydrates, where today the Hawaiian people have about 28% from complex carbohydrates. And very little sugar, only 3% in the ancient diet versus 15% in the modern diet. And of course, in the ancient diet, that was coming from fruits. Today, it's coming from sugars and processed foods. And in the ancient traditional Hawaiian diet, only about 10% of their total calories came in the form of fat, compared to 42% of today. The traditional Hawaiian principles of eating a healthy diet really did a lot to promote the Hawaiians' health and wellness. And the ancient Hawaiians were really very strong, healthy, lean, muscular, tall. Obesity was very rare. They were very athletic. In fact, in the early drawings from Captain Cook and other artists that drew the ancient Hawaiians, and even in some of the early photographs that were taken, you don't really see obese Hawaiians. They were very active in activity as far as their exercise was concerned. Very trim bodies, very healthy bodies, unlike what we see today. The warriors were very muscular and strong, very tall, even up to 7 feet in height. Tall, graceful, slim was the description in much of the early writings about the Hawaiian people. In fact, in a description by a European missionary visiting Hawaii in 1832, he noted that the natives are in general above middle stature, well-formed with fine muscular limbs, their gait graceful and sometimes stately. Historical records actually suggest that there was very little, if any, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, or obesity. In fact, the evidence suggests that prior to Western contact and Western diets, Native Hawaiians had little cardiovascular disease and obesity. The children of the old times were very healthy, unlike the Hawaiians today, where we have a lot of obesity amongst young kids, but they were quite healthy and lean. Now, things began to change in the late 18th century as the foreign ships began to come to Hawaii. Captain Cook arriving in 1778. Infectious disease killed many, many Hawaiians. And also, as the boats came in, the contact with other people from throughout the world brought diseases and bad habits as far as diet and foods that the Hawaiians were not accustomed to eating. A major contributing factor to the sharp decline in health of Hawaiians was the change in their diet and in their lifestyle. We have a phrase that we call the Hawaiian paradox, because the paradox is that for many years Hawaii has been considered the health state. And this is for a good reason, because Hawaii is the healthiest state in the United States from a standpoint of longevity. Now, how many of you saw the newspaper? This just came out this week. It was in all the newspapers nationwide that, in the headlines, that reported Hawaii as the #1 state in longevity. We're the only state with an average life expectancy topping 80, according to a recent Harvard study that was just published this week. And this is due in large to Hawaii's large Asian population. Now, the tragic irony is that we are the healthiest state as far as longevity is concerned, but our own Native Hawaiian people have the worst health statistics in the nation. And this is what we refer to as the Hawaii paradox. Native Hawaiians have the shortest lifespan among all ethnic groups in Hawaii, and also among the shortest in the United States. Pure Hawaiians have the highest mortality rates for cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, and cancer as compared to that in all other ethnic groups in the nation. And you can see here on the chart illustrating mortality rates of Native Hawaiians compared to the average mortality rates for all races in the United States. And this has been adjusted for age and sex per 100,000. And you can see there's a big difference of Native Hawaiians compared to the average American. Here we see the prevalence of obesity among Native Hawaiians compared to African Americans and Caucasian Americans. A lot of people think of African Americans having higher obesity rates, but even the Hawaiians far exceed that percentage of Native Hawaiians who are obese is the highest in the United States, approximately 64%, 66%. Now, this chart shows the 10 leading causes of death in the United States and highlights the non-diet-related causes of death compared to the diet-related causes of death. And you'll see and notice that 5 of the 10 leading causes of death in the U.S. are diet-related. And these diet-related causes of death are the leading causes of death with the modern Hawaiians. So diet is related to the problems that they're having today. Here we see a comparison of the typical American diet versus the traditional Hawaiian diet. Notice that the weight of the food in the American diet is less than that of the traditional Hawaiian diet, yet the typical American diet has significantly more calories, in fact, 1,000 more calories compared to the traditional Hawaiian diet, if you do a comparison. And let's take a look at what a typical traditional Hawaiian meal actually looked like. And I'll give you some examples here to do that, and we'll compare that to the way Americans are eating and traditional and Hawaiians are today. Here we have a meal made up of taro, poi, sweet potato, taro greens, mountain apple, fish, and seaweed. Only 837 calories. That's a large meal. A lot of food, a lot of bulk, a lot of healthy foods there. Compare that to a typical modern American meal of cheeseburger and French fries, and we see 1,077 calories. So a big difference. Unfortunately, the typical Hawaiian now in modern times has become more westernized and has their own Hawaiian-style fast food meals here, and this is one of the most popular plate lunches we call a loco moco. And a loco moco is basically made up of white rice, a hamburger patty, fried egg, and gravy, and they usually have macaroni and salad with that, with all that mayonnaise. So you can see the difference between the cheeseburger and French fries modern fast food compared to the Hawaiian fast food plate lunch, and it even exceeds what the typical American is eating. Spam is actually a new Hawaiian staple. And believe it or not, they even had a Hawaii collector's edition of Spam. And one of the very popular dishes with Spam, of course, this Spam became popular in Hawaii after World War II when the soldiers were here and bringing over the canned meats. Native Hawaiians picked it up, and they've been addicted to it ever since. And do you know Spam in Hawaii per capita is consumed more in Hawaii than anywhere else in the United States? This is what we call Spam musubi. It's a favorite food amongst local people here. Basically, it's white sticky rice with a layer of Spam and wrapped around with seaweed. And Hawaii children will eat this, and they love this all the time. So in order to improve the health of the Native Hawaiian people, programs have been developed to get Native Hawaiians back on their traditional diet. And one of the programs was the Waianae Diet Program. This was a community-based program designed by the Waianae Coast Comprehensive Health Center in response to the high rates of obesity and chronic diseases among Native Hawaiians. This program was developed and studied by Dr. Terry Shintani, who is a prominent physician here in Hawaii, and also he is a trained nutritionist from Harvard University. And he did this work with Dr. Claire Hughes, a Native Hawaiian registered dietitian and nutritionist, and with her colleagues at the Waianae Coast Comprehensive Health Center. And their research appeared in 1991 in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Now, in their initial study, they had 20 people of Native Hawaiian ancestry. They were placed on a very strict traditional Hawaiian diet for 21 days. And participants were weighed regularly, and their cholesterol and triglyceride levels and blood pressure and other factors were looked at. The Waianae Diet Study and Program had several factors in it. First of all, it was non-calorie restricted obesity protocol. They were allowed to eat as much food as they wanted to as long as it was the traditional Hawaiian foods. They had dietary clinical intervention. The cultural sensitivity was very important to the Hawaiian culture. It was a transitional diet. And as in the Hawaii custom, it was a total person approach of mind, body, and spirit. They came together. They had groups that we call ohana groups in Hawaii, and that means family, where they'd share. They had support groups to help them follow this diet. It was a community-wide intervention at Waianae, at the Waianae Coast here on Oahu. And they had role modeling of individuals in that community who exemplified good health and really followed the diet. They became teachers to the people as well. The Waianae diet program demonstrated after the 21 days that there was significant weight loss with no calorie restriction, improved blood pressure, improved serum glucose, and improved lipids. In fact, many of the diabetics were able to get off their medications. It actually reversed the indications of diabetes, and many were able to get off their cholesterol-lowering medications. This gives you an example of the average energy intake of the participants before the program, the pre-program diet, compared to the program Hawaiian diet. Fat before going in was about 32%, carbohydrate 51%, 17% of the calories is protein, and the fat drastically dropped to only 7%, which is typical of the ancient diet. 78% carbohydrate, of course, in complex carbohydrates, and 15% protein. This is the Waianae diet program results, mean changes and risk factors after 21 days on the traditional Hawaiian diet without calorie restriction. I think that's important to know. This is kind of like the volumetrics approach. You know, you're getting lots of food, you fill up, and you don't need to have all those calories. But look at some of the significant changes. You see change in percent changes. Weight dropped 17 pounds on average, 31-point drop, or a 14% change in total cholesterol. HDL had a slight drop, but the LDL, there was a 17.2 point drop, or 11.2%, which is very significant. A drop in triglycerides. Here again, this is a high carbohydrate diet, yet triglycerides dropped by 98 points, a 41.5% drop. Glucose, 38.5 drop, and blood pressures dropped as well. So there were some big changes in the risk factors by making the change to going back to this traditional Hawaiian diet. They've taken larger groups and looked at over 33 days here, and they had a 15-pound drop in weight. Now, Dr. Shintani also looked at long-term weight reduction maintenance, even up to 6 to 8 years later, and still saw weight loss adherence. Here, 18.3 pounds still lost after 6 to 8 years. So the plant-based diet, what we can learn from the ancient Hawaiian diet and how that can apply to us is that going back to these traditional diets that are low in fat, high in complex carbohydrate foods, and high in foods of vegetable origin can have significant improvements and even reversal of many of the diseases that may plague us in the United States as well as the ancient Hawaiians. Of course, as dietitians, you can't go back to Iowa and say, okay, I want you to start eating poi, right? So we've got to make this practical. So a different phase of this study, and there have been multicultural diet menus based on all different types of foods that have taken the principles of the ancient Hawaiian diet so that you can include Chinese and Mexican and Japanese, vegetarian cuisine, and follow the same concepts of the ancient diet so that it may be more palatable to the people you're going to be reaching back on the mainland. And you can see significant improvements in blood results and the test results when you have patients follow that type of program. Let's talk about some of the Hawaiian foods. And of course, taro, the Hawaiian name kalo, is the most significant plant food in ancient Hawaii. The ancient Hawaiians grew taro in the valleys and patches that they had in those valleys. Hawaiians ate lots of taro. They highly prized it. They used the whole part of the plant, not only the bottom part, the leaves, and all parts of that plant were included in the diet. A very important part of the Hawaiian diet, and it's really key to their survival in many ways. The taro plant grows best in water. Here's a taro merchant in front of Diamond Head. Do you see all the hotels there? I don't know if he'd sell many today, but... And look at that. That's a taro patch. Look at Diamond Head. I don't see all the hotels there either. Back in 1910. So the Hawaiians would pound taro and add water to it, make it into a paste. Some describe it as like wallpaper paste. And they would use the poi pounders to grind up and make this paste and add water to have the consistency of the poi that we had served at our little banquet last night. But it definitely is a very healthy food. In fact, my daughter, I raised her on a poi. From the nutrient composition, now we're looking at both the roots and the leaves. There's different key nutrients, but cooked taro leaves are very high in vitamin A, of course, in the form of beta-carotene and vitamin C. Cooked taro is also a good source of vitamin B6 and dietary fiber. This is a nutritional information that I have provided in your handout that looks at the corms. That's the bottom part of the taro plant, the leaves, the top, that are also known as luau leaves, and the petioles, the stem goes up to the leaves, and all of these were eaten by the Hawaiian people. They did not waste any part of the taro. Sweet potato, or uala, is also a very important staple in the Hawaiian diet. Sweet potatoes are high in vitamin A and form beta-carotene and vitamin C, good source of B6, potassium, and dietary fiber. And they also ate the greens of the sweet potato, where they probably got a lot of their calcium and other important vitamins. Of course, we really like Okinawa sweet potatoes here, the purple potato. We had that last night in potato salad form. It's also referred to as Hawaiian potato. They're a delicious potato to include in the diet as well. Limu is the seaweed. Sea vegetation was an important part of the Hawaiian diet. In fact, some nutritionists, we talk about eating greens and bright-colored vegetables in our diet. Some nutritionists even think we should consider having maybe one serving of sea vegetation in our diet to get some of the trace elements that we may not get commonly in our plants that grow on the ground. Seaweed, or limu, is a good source of calcium and trace minerals. However, it is high in sodium, and that's to be of concern for people that have high blood pressure, of course. Banana was also a very important part of the diet, maya in Hawaiian. A banana tree grows best where it's wet, so the Hawaiians planted them in the valleys. They planted them near their homes and sometimes on the banks of the taro patches. The Hawaiians had over 70 kinds of bananas in ancient times. Some were cooking bananas. Most bananas were eaten raw when ripe as a fruit. Bananas were considered an important food and were offered to the gods in high chiefs at ceremonial feasts, so it was quite a prized fruit. By the way, they were forbidden fruit for women. However, here at ADA, we'll let you have some. One of the favorite bananas of Hawaii are the small apple bananas. I don't know if you've seen those, but they have like a little, somewhat of a mild apple flavoring to them. Bananas are high in vitamin B6 and a good source of vitamin C, potassium, and dietary fiber. Breadfruit, or ulu, is also a starch that played an important role to the Hawaiians. It was actually brought to Hawaii by migrating Polynesians on the boats of early times. The Hawaiians planted breadfruit trees in sheltered wet valleys. They let them grow wild, and Hawaiians like to eat breadfruit when it's picked ripe from the tree. It's kind of like squash or potato. When it's peeled, it was boiled, steamed, baked, and grilled. In Hawaii, it was sometimes even made into poi, what they call ulu poi. However, the Hawaiians really preferred the taro the best. And in Hawaiian tradition, breadfruit was a symbol of creation and the Creator's generosity and love. So there's a lot of symbolism of importance to the Hawaiian people. Breadfruit was also a very important carbohydrate and energy source to the native Hawaiians of ancient times. It's high in vitamin C and dietary fiber, and also a very good source of potassium. Coconut, or niu, played an important role in the ancient Hawaiian diet and daily life. The original coconuts were introduced to Hawaii by migrating Polynesians. Hawaiians typically planted the coconut trees near the beach. They have a very soft meat. They would often give the soft meat to young children, fed their babies with it. And of course, the mature coconuts provided coconut milk, and chunks of the ripe coconut meat were grated and chopped and eaten in many different foods that the Hawaiians ate. Coconut meat provides some fiber, but is very high in saturated fat. And of course, coconut oil is one of the highest forms of saturated fat there is. And unfortunately, coconut oil is touted today as a health food. I don't know if you see that. A lot of people use it and they promote it as a healthy fat because it has no trans fats. but it definitely can raise cholesterol. Guava or guava, the yellow round fruit known for its juice, is another non-native fruit that has been associated with Hawaii, but originally it was actually brought to Hawaii from Spain. And guavas, if you go on hikes around the islands here, you'll see guavas growing wild all over the place. They are now cultivated commercially on a large scale here in Hawaii and basically used in canning or frozen guava juice, guava jam, jelly. It's also found in a lot of the local stores you'll find here at Waikiki. Guava is very high in vitamin C and fiber, a good source of beta-carotene fiber as well. And lychees were brought to Hawaii by the Chinese. They're a delicious fruit, spherical. You've got to take that bright red shell off of it, but inside the shell is really a creamy, translucent fruit surrounded by a dark seed in the center. It's a great fruit, so try it if you haven't had one. They're very high in vitamin C. In fact, 10 lychees, raw lychees, have the daily value for vitamin C. Mango or manako is another fruit, of course, that is very popular here in Hawaii. In fact, these are all the different types of mangoes that you find on the Big Island over there. You find them all over the place. They've been a favorite here for a long time. The mango tree thrives in warm, dry areas of Hawaii, at particularly below 1,000-foot elevation. And there are many varieties, as you see here. Mangoes, of course, are a very excellent source of beta-carotene because of the yellow color there, and vitamin C. Papaya or mikana, papaya, another fruit associated with Hawaii, was really introduced to Hawaii back in the 1880s. While it's ripe, it's used as a fruit, but when it's not ripe, as green papaya, often used in salads like in Thai cuisine. Green papaya salad is a very popular thing here locally. Papayas, of course, are a very rich source of vitamin C and also a source of beta-cryptoxanthin, an important carotenoid that is a very potent antioxidant, and has the enzyme papain in it. Passion fruit or lilikoi, another popular fruit that was introduced to the Hawaiian Islands, not native to Hawaii, but passion fruit is also found growing wild often out in the mountains. It's high in vitamin C and dietary fiber, particularly high when you consume the seeds along with the fruit part of it and the pulp, and a good source of beta-carotene. Now, pineapple, hala kahiki, was introduced actually to Hawaii. It's been associated with Hawaii as a native fruit for a long time, but really was brought over here by South America. And the native Hawaiians really didn't know pineapple at all. And when you think of pineapple, you think of James Dole. He was our pineapple king, and the name Dole really has been very prominent here in Hawaii, and in a big way, James Dole made Hawaii synonymous with pineapples as he built the pineapple industry here in Hawaii. Now, pineapple used to grow quite extensively out here on Oahu, but now more and more of the pineapples are growing in the Philippines, and less pineapples grow in Hawaii, but there still is quite a bit that is. This is over on Maui, some of the pineapple fields. In the early days, because pineapples were hard to get to the mainland fresh without spoiling, of course, the canning of pineapples became real big. Pineapples are, of course, a very rich source of vitamin C and a source of bromelain, the enzyme, proteolytic enzyme that we find in pineapple. Macadamia nuts, a native actually to Australia. They were brought over here to build a major industry in the macadamia business. In fact, many mac farms are on the Big Island. So if you get over the Big Island, you'll see quite a few of the macadamia nut farms. And did you know Hawaii supplies 90% of the world's macadamia nuts? Macadamia nuts, of course, are very rich in monounsaturated fats. They are the highest fat and calorie content of any nut. It's a good source of magnesium, copper, thiamine, and niacin. Here we have, looking at the monounsaturated composition of macadamia nut oil, we see that it has the highest percentage of monounsaturates exceeding olive oil and canola oil. And here locally they are trying to build more business with the macadamia nut oil. So while you're here in Hawaii, we want you to try these different foods, enjoy them, be adventurous. Yes, try that poi even. And enjoy the abundance of paradise of foods that we have here.